And Lord Cameron has accused Nigel Farage of trying to destroy the Conservative Party by standing for reform. Well, is Lord Cameron right? Could Nigel Farage completely destroy the Tory party? Let's get the views of Britain's best-known political double act, Neil and Christine Hamilton, the Hamiltons. Neil, you've been a Conservative MP during some very difficult times. Will Nigel succeed in destroying the party?
Well, I was a Conservative MP during the greatest times, actually, under Margaret Thatcher. That's the problem. The Tories have moved so far from those heady days that they've actually committed suicide. And yes, I don't think Nigel will destroy the Conservative Party. They've done a very good job of that for themselves. Of course, all he's doing is filling the void that they've left, because they've alienated and deliberately condescended to their own natural support base. The big problem is that David Cameron, when he became the Tory leader, styled himself as the heir to Blair, and they've stuffed the candidatures in constituencies with Blairites ever since. They're still doing it today. Even when they stare into the abyss, they're still putting spads and insiders into what used to be very safe Conservative seats, so that after the election and the complete cataclysm, the Tory party will never change. So, of course, in one sense, I think Nigel is absolutely right to say that what we need to do is obliterate the current Conservative Party so that a real Conservative Party can take its place.
But Neil, what does obliteration look like? Could it mean the end of the Conservative Party brand altogether? Could it mean its total disappearance as an organisation to be replaced by, for example, Reform UK?
Well, I think that would be a bold claim, because the electoral system is very brutal to insurgent parties. In 2015, UKIP got 4.5 million votes, and we won only one constituency, and that's likely to be the fate of Reform in this election, unless the Tories implode even further and Reform moves up a few points in the polls. And the odds very likely are against that. But the big problem is that we have a Conservative Party in name, but it doesn't actually act in a Conservative way. They've done nothing to capitalise upon Brexit. They've completely, spectacularly failed to control immigration. They've doubled down on all the green crap, as David Cameron once memorably described it, and saddled us with vast bills, making our economy more inefficient by spending huge amounts of money on windmills and solar parks and so on. And in so many other ways, they've done nothing to counteract the woke culture that's infesting our civil service and all our public institutions. I mean, there's nothing Conservative about the current Conservative Party at all. That's their big problem. It's an exercise in mis-selling on a vast scale.
OK, well, of course, Rishi Sunak would argue that the Tories have outlined plans to reduce taxes, get the economy growing, stop the boats and tackle immigration. All very Conservative principles. But it's interesting to hear what you've got to say, Neil. Christine, could July the 4th be an existential moment for the Conservative Party?
Well, frankly, I think, just to go back a tiny bit, the Conservative Party could be reported under the Trade Descriptions Act, because they're absolutely not Conservatives, and therein lies the problem. And this is why Farage has been so successful. One of the big problems, if I could just go back to Reform, sorry, I'm doing a politician's act of not answering your question. Reform's problem is that it's not a proper political party. It's a company. It's wholly owned by Nigel Farage, a bit of Richard Tyson, someone else who's the treasurer. If they had had any sense when they first started to get people signing up, sending money, they would have got their names and addresses. They would have started to form branches, just like the Lib Dems did years and years ago, and they started to come up through local politics. If they had done that, they would now know, all these years later, where their support was. They could have local people on the ground, they could do canvassing, and they could get their vote out. As it is, they actually don't have much idea where their support lies, which is why it's going to be very difficult to predict how many, if any, MPs they're going to get, because nobody really knows where these Reform voters are. I've completely forgotten your question. Was it about the Tories?
Well, is it an existential moment? Yeah, is July the 4th an existential moment? You've had too much Pinot Grigio, Christine.
Oh, I know. The real answer is I haven't had enough, because I've been on the wagon for a long time. This is half soda water, by the way.
Part.
I do think
5%.
Stop it. You've had your say.
And that looks like a urine sample from Neil. Christine,
everybody knows.
what do you think? Are we looking at
Will
an
you let me
existential
finish?
moment for the Tories?
I'm trying to answer, Mark. You've just interrupted again. Yes, of course it is. They are going to be completely and utterly wiped out. The problem is who is going to remain, which MPs are going to be there. I mean, it's sod's law, isn't it? You'll probably find that the MPs who survive are not really, just by the luck of the draw and whether they're in a safe seat or not, they'll probably be the wishy-washy Social Democrat ones. If they're the rock-hard, proper Conservatives who remain as the rump of the Tory party in Parliament, then there is some hope for them. But if they're not, and if, as it were, all the wrong ones get defeated and the right one, we know what I'm trying to say, if the wrong ones get elected, they're going to be in a mess and there will be no way the Tory party can reconfigure. But Nigel Farage is not a Conservative, so I think the idea that he can lead the Conservative Party is moonshine. He can possibly lead a new right-wing conglomeration or whatever you want to call it. But, I mean, it's an absolutely unholy mess.
Very briefly, Christine.
Yes.
Christine, do you see the Conservative brand surviving? Or in the next 5 to 10 years, does it become Reform UK and the Conservative Party consigned to the dustbin of history?
Well, I think it depends on who is elected to the Tory party. As I've tried to explain, who is elected, who is there,
fair enough.
Carry on the torch.
And as you say, that's the luck of the draw. Neil, there's talk of a Labour supermajority, perhaps the biggest in 100 years. Does the scale of Labour's victory matter should they prevail?
Well, yeah, it does, of course, obviously, because the thought of a Labour government for 5 years in an unchallengeable position is horrific. Just look at Wales, if you want an example of what that does to you. For the last 25 years, they've had a Labour government, very often in alliance with the Welsh nationalists, but the Welsh nationalists are even further woke and left than Labour, and Wales has been completely ruined. And so this is what will happen. But that's democracy. Every so often you do have to have a change of government. There are times when governments need to lose elections. Sadly, I think this is one of them, because as I see no sign that the Conservative Party recognises why it's in this mess and is prepared to face up to the mistakes that they've made and admit them and move on to an agenda which is likely to succeed, then I'm afraid what we do need to do is sweep away all those who are responsible for the debacle that's about to engulf them. And if only we could have a party led by, for example, Jacob Rees-Mogg, or indeed any other GB News presenter for that matter, then I think they would do a lot better.
Oh, OK. Listen, Neil and Christine, what a thrill to have you back on the show. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday evening. I'm delighted you've fallen off the wagon in style, Christine.